Hey guys, this is Rob McIntyre, a clinical therapist, addiction counselor, coming back to you again. This is my second video. Appreciated you guys watching the first one on identity and recovery. Please, I'm learning a lot about doing podcasts. By the way, I'm not very familiar with this as of yet, so last week was kind of me just leaping by faith doing this process, but wanted to make sure that you guys, when you watch this, that you hit like, and please give me comments, feedback. That's very helpful. Ended up getting a lot of great comments from folks last week, and hopefully it's going to help me to continue to do these and it's going to be something that's going to be really beneficial for you. And subscribe, please subscribe. I'm going to be doing these weekly. I'm really going to try to do my best to give you guys practical things that you can use in your own journey. And again, last week I talked about doing the 3 stomachs and talking about that, but when I went over the podcast, I felt like there's some more practical things that I could follow up with you guys this week. So we'll be doing the 3 stomachs next week, and you're going to really enjoy that. It's kind of a fun way to kind of make sense out of a lot of the struggles we have by understanding that we have 3 stomachs. And I know maybe for some of you that comes as a shock, but I'm going to prove it to you, I promise. So that'll be coming next week. Again, tonight we're going to talk about identity in recovery, part 2. And what I want to cover is one, that in our identities, as I said last week, our identity typically comes from our childhood, when we're being raised, things that were said to us, our home life, how our parents might have raised us, or if we were neglected emotionally or physically, something negative happened, we experienced something very painful. A lot of times those very experiences can create in us some negative messages, and then we begin to believe them over time. And what I've noticed in treating a lot of addicts is that tends to be really what perpetuates their addiction, is this core belief. And so I wanted to today just really give you guys some practical ways of beginning to become aware and to actually create some solutions. So I'm going to actually give you some homework, and I'd love to hear what you think of this, and I'd love to hear some of your work if you're willing to share it with me. That'd be great. And maybe even if it's something that's really valuable that we could pass on to others, we could somehow put you on here and let you get to share those. But so we're going to start out just kind of talking about something that's really common in addiction, which is codependency. Over 80% of addicts have codependency, and a great description of codependency just basically is an unhealthy dependency in somebody else. And so what happens with codependency is you actually don't develop in your ability to be healthy as an adult independently. And what that creates is it creates then these relationships that many times can become toxic. And one of the ways to just think about it is an addiction is a codependent relationship. You have an object relationship with a behavior or a substance that ultimately takes over your life and ultimately causes you to not grow in your ability to be a healthy human. So with that, we want to just kind of be real clear about even just a simple development. So one of the things I love to share with people is there's really 3 phases of development in our identity and relationship. So the first would be just normal child development. And the first phase of childhood development is to become dependent on your caregiver. So when we're born, of course, we need to be cared for, we need to be fed, held and changed and all those things. And so children begin to figure this out. They figure out, okay, if I cry and if I do these things, I'll get this need met. But as we begin to grow into close to our teenage years, we begin to kind of go, well, I want to do this on my own. I feel like I don't need to always have my parents do everything. And then obviously when we get teenagers, which I've had four boys, they begin to get dependent, and you start to see changes. You start to see them push back on certain things. Sorry, ladies, for you that have sons, you kind of know that they begin to they don't need mom like they needed mom earlier. So they go from dependent to independence. And then as we grow in our independence, and hopefully what we do is we end up continuing to emotionally figure things out as well as spiritually. So we're physical, emotional, and spiritual. And as we grow into adulthood, hopefully by that time we have a sense of self. We have a sense that I am capable, or I have resources. I have family members, I have education, I have a level of intelligence, I can learn. And then when we meet a significant person in our life, hopefully, a permanent relationship or a marriage, then what happens is we develop interdependence. Now that's healthy. That would be the healthy way of beginning to do a relationship. But unfortunately, because addictions tend to, again, teach us how to be codependent, then what happens is we look for people to solve our needs. So for instance, some of you may have had relationships where you found, maybe for a woman, looking to a husband to meet the needs that she didn't have as a young girl from her father. So she's looking to that man for some kind of daddy need. That would be kind of what we typically hear. And then the other would be, of course, then the male looking for mommy needs. Maybe he didn't get nurtured. That was something that I experienced just in a chaotic life as a child growing up, and different traumas that happened to me, that I actually would, and this is not conscious, this doesn't happen consciously, but we subconsciously look to, in my case, look to my wife or to other women to meet a need that really wasn't supposed to be met through them at all. And so as I said last week, the spiritual understanding of who we are, our value, our identity it's critical. It's extremely critical that we have a sense of what that is, and we learn how to grow in that. So what happens with us emotionally is many times, if we are not healthy, and if we are struggling with an addiction or some unhealthy attachment, then we have to begin to kind of become aware. We've got to become aware of that unhealthy relationship, the unhealthy balance. One of the ways I'd help men a lot to do this is go, okay, if you get into an argument with your significant other or your partner, and you feel very young and you feel very immature, and you act out immaturely, then that may be an indication that there's something there. And one of the things I specifically ask guys is that, how old did you feel emotionally in that moment? And if that moment you felt like, I think it was like 8 or 9, then you might want to look at, okay, what happened in your childhood around that time? That may actually be a way for you to begin to identify and become internally aware and emotionally aware of the very core issues around identity. So one of the things I've said recently to a group of folks who are in recovery, we were talking about toxic relationships, and we were talking about moving in to being healthy and sober. And one of the things that needs to be understood, if you do have an addiction, if you are not sober, you are not going to have this emotional awareness. You are not going to be able to make sense out of your core issues. And the reason is because I've never been able, when I was in law enforcement, never was able to speak sense or talk sense into somebody who is inebriated. And you got to understand that if there is an addiction, then there is a degree of inebriation. Again, addictions, they vary. There's so many. There's substance abuse, there's process addictions. Um, You've probably even met people who are materialistic, people who use materialism as a way to identify themselves. And if you threaten that, you may get a very either immature or overreaction, and that tends to indicate that there's something that's not maturely developed there. So what I ended up telling this group of folks in recovery is I said the first thing you got to do is look around and identify who's safe and who isn't safe. So the other way to say this is you've got to circle the wagons, like the old westerns, right? So why did they circle the wagons? The reason they circled the wagons was if they felt that there was a threat, such as in the old western movies, the Indians were attacking them, they would circle the wagons, they'd turn the wagons over, they'd put the innocent and the folks who were unwilling to or incapable of fighting, shoot a gun or something like that. They'd put them in the center in a protective place as best as they could, and then you'd have the folks who can actually handle a weapon, and they'd be out in the circle. And a lot of times they would say if the fighting would stop and there's somebody outside of the circle, they'd go friend or foe, friend or foe, friend or foe, right? And what that was meant to indicate is what's your intention. And so a lot of times what we have to figure out is, are these people who historically have been in our lives, but we've been codependent or unhealthy in our identity, or we've had an addiction, are they going to support us, and are they going to cause us to grow in our healing and in our recovery? So you got to identify friends or foe, right? And that can be really difficult because in some cases you may have to say goodbye to some people for a period of time, or depending on the toxicity and if they're abusive, that you may have to literally say, I can't be in relationship with you. I have this unhealthy dependency on you that causes me to not grow and be the best of me, to be the best version of me. So that's the first thing, is to identify those around you and to become aware of your own emotional state. And then one of the fun things I get to do with folks is, and this is kind of your homework, by the way, is first identify where you think you are in this. Are you still dependent? Are you codependent? Have you gotten to the place of independence? And in what relationships do I need to cut off that I become dependent on? Because here's the thing that I just want to be clear about codependency is you are not going to be able to grow or be mature in the areas emotionally and spiritually that you need to be if you're going to actually begin to pack on or put on other healthy relationships. Those relationships will never ever become healthy. They will cycle through immaturity, they'll cycle through different types of issues, communications issues. The ability to be intimate is dependent on your ability to be mature and to understand your value. If you don't feel valued, if you at the core part of who you are as a human don't understand your value, then what happens is people can unfortunately invade those parts. They can manipulate you. And a lot of times what you'll want to be manipulated. We hear crazy stories of people who say over years, I was taken advantage of, I lost myself. I don't even know who I am. I hear that all the time helping addicts. They get into recovery and they start getting sober and they go, I don't know who I am. I don't even know what my purpose is. I don't even know where or what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I feel lost. And so on this journey to become whole, we have to be able to first and foremost get sober so we can begin to listen and measure, and with the help of a therapist or with groups or loved ones, begin to understand what is going on inside of me that needs to be fixed. And then by identifying the negative folks around you, those who will not be trustworthy when you begin to open up your heart and your soul to them, then you have to probably either cut them off or temporarily, until you're healthy in those relationships. And if you have questions concerning that, and obviously if you would love to look at that individually in your own story or your own life, feel free to give me a call. I'd love to work with you, or we can, email or whatever. But then the second part of it, the homework I want to give you guys, is to begin to understand what is my purpose. So one of the ways I do this is I ask folks to write out a mission statement. What's a mission statement? We see mission statements all the time in companies, corporations. What they do is they basically come up with this purpose. Why do we exist as a corporation? Some corporations have some great mission statements. One of the sheriff's departments I worked for had a great mission statement, and in the mission statement, it was really pretty neat, because what they did is they basically kind of had this litmus test. They said, if what you're doing isn't by the letter of the rule from the mission statement or what's stated in the mission statement, but it actually supports and is part of the mission statement, then you don't have anything to worry about. We will support it. And it was kind of intended to give us not just the letter, but the spirit of the mission statement. So many of you need to figure out, what is my mission? What is my purpose? First and foremost. And again, that's going to be something that's going to be spiritual and emotional. I find that a lot of young folks that are in recovery, that is really, really an important thing for them to do. This opiate epidemic that's been going on in our country, and all over the world, has just arrested young people's development, and they've not been able to experience what it's like to be an adult and to experience the joy of having purpose and having a mission. So one would be to create a mission statement. Just an idea would be for you to maybe Google mission statements and look at that and maybe create your own mission statement for yourself. Then the second one, which is a lot of fun, that I love to communicate with folks, is to begin to look at yourself as a sovereign nation. So, for instance, back to the codependency I was saying a little bit earlier, that when we are codependent, what happens is many times there are those who actually, they may be a perpetrator, they may be somebody who's looking for somebody who's weak, looking for somebody who they could take advantage of. If you find yourself in those kind of relationships over and over again, I would probably say that you have some issues with your own identity, your own core beliefs, and your own sovereign parts of who you are, your own boundaries. So what I like to say is, we need to create your own country. So you need to become your own country. And what that means is you got to have your own Declaration of Independence. You need to define what are your country's boundaries. And I know we've had a lot of political turmoil over boundaries and walls and all that, but any good country, any country that is sovereign, knows what part of their boundaries are, and they will defend it, and they will deal with somebody who tries to invade them. So codependency is a lot like that. You have to begin to understand that somebody invading your sovereign territory is going to be critical, and you're going to need to know what that is. So we've got your identity as a country, whatever you want to do. So maybe for me it would be the country of Rob. and then kind of have some fun with it. You might develop a flag and a crest, and kind of have some fun with it. And then your Declaration of Independence would say, four score and so many years ago I was born, and I'm going to now have freedom in my life, and I'm going to choose to pursue these things. And anybody who takes away my value or my identity, they, however you want to say it, could be a lot of fun doing. And then I would also suggest that you do a constitution that would go along with that. And basically all these things do, just like a country, is we begin to define who we are, and we begin to define our identity as a human. So a human country may be another way to say it. And then finally, to understand boundaries, I kind of use this little metaphor I tell people all the time. So it goes like this. If I was to have a jewelry store, and the jewelry store, let's say my inventory was 100 grand, and so I go and I'm setting up alarm systems and insurance, I would probably go and get an insurance policy, an alarm system that would be probably relevant to the amount of inventory. I'm not going to go buy a $5 million alarm system, sophisticated alarm system for about $100,000 worth of inventory. Nor is my insurance policy going to be $5 million. It's going to cover my inventory. So it's consistent with the value. But let's say somebody comes along and says, "Hey, I got this $6 million diamond, and I would love to put it in your store on consignment." And you get to have actually maybe 15% of the sales proceeds. And so then I would, as a business owner, go, well, I've only have $100,000, but now with this $5 million diamond, I better up my insurance, and I better up my my alarm system, because now that there is this greater value on the inside, there might be people who might want to take advantage of that. So what changed? We got a store, we're a business owner. What changed is what's on the inside. So what I find for people who struggle with boundaries, it typically is indicative of what is on the inside, what is perceived on the inside. So when you begin to realize your value, you tend to have better boundaries. And the practical aspects of boundaries, there may be some relationships, there may be something that's gone on in your life. Those would be things that you can work through with somebody, a counselor or somebody, sponsor in recovery, to help you work through, are these consistent with my value? What we tend to see is that the lack of boundaries is really an indicator of what you really believe's on the inside. So again, the alarm system, the insurance is typically consistent of what is perceived value on the inside. So your boundaries are the exact same thing. When you have healthy boundaries and when you know your value, you are actually going to inherently know how to deal with things. And it takes some practice. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some emotional awareness and insight on yourself. But again, this all goes back to the core belief of who we are. And just remember, it takes time to get to the core of who we are as humans, mostly if you are in recovery. In my case, it took me a long time. It took me months to even begin to become aware of emotions, because I had compartmentalized and shut things down for a good majority of my life. And nor did law enforcement help me, because that was kind of one of the jobs where being emotional wasn't always the best way to respond to a call, is to do that with emotion. So I learned to shut down and to not feel. And so in my recovery, beginning to feel was really important. Just remember that you have to feel to heal. You're not gonna grow if you can't feel. So we're going to talk about that in further episodes, but this is just really just kind of the basics of beginning to become aware of your identity, and the evidence of your identity and your core belief is going to be based on your ability to have healthy boundaries. Hopefully that makes sense. And so the basic stuff that I want you to do, if you need to look at this, is come up again with your own mission statement, identify who is toxic, who historically, and that could be your addiction too. Quite frankly, your addiction is an invader, right? And by the way, I love to say it this way: our addictions are terrorists, and our addiction's intent is not to give us a better life. Maybe in the moment it feels better, but it's if it was personified, it would never be the type of person we'd want to hang around. Our country, the U.S., and most first world countries we don't negotiate with terrorists. Why? Because we understand that terrorism, it's not the type of people you want to negotiate with. I always say, in kind of a humorous way, are you going to hug a suicide bomber? You going to hug it out? Really? You want to hug a suicide bomber? You don't try to negotiate with a terrorist. You don't try to hug a suicide bomber. So the same thing with somebody who is toxic, somebody who's been abusive. You don't negotiate with your addiction. It's either all or nothing. It's in or out. And again, sobriety, what sobriety does, and as we begin to get sober in our thinking, so part of it is becoming sober emotionally, as well as sober physically. And as time goes on, you become aware of those feelings and those deeper thoughts. And to get to the deepest thoughts of who we are and our beliefs of ourselves, that takes time. It takes work. It's going to be hard work to get to that. It took me a long time to begin to realize that I really had some negative core beliefs about myself, and to really become aware, do the inventory of what those were connected to, and to grieve them, to process them, and to begin to replace them with truth and principles of value. So if you'd like, I would be, again, more than willing to kind of hear your thoughts and your ideas and what your creativity about your country and your Declaration of Independence and all that stuff. And please give me some feedback on the metaphor of boundaries in the jewelry store to see if that works. So one of the things I didn't tell you guys last video podcast, was to make sure that if you do like these videos, hit the like button, real critical, and then also subscribe and hit the little bell so you get you actually get the notice that the video's going to be put up on YouTube. And I'm going to be doing that tonight, so you should be able to get that. And then also, please give me your comments. I want to adjust. And one of the comments from last week, which was my first video, it went to 46 minutes, and one of the guys go, we don't have that much attention span, so I'm going to keep it to 30 minutes. I'm just about right there. So really appreciate you guys listening. Again, my heart is to really encourage you and exhort you in your recovery and in who you are, and as you pursue life and being the best version of you. That's what I want to do. And I'm just going to say this finally is, last week I got a little bit into my faith, and the reason I did is I kind of felt like, if somebody was to give you the antidote for the coronavirus, how would you feel if they only offered you 2/3 of it? So meaning, I can help you stop the cough and the sniffle and maybe the chest stuff, but it's not truly going to heal you. Well, to me, that just wouldn't be right? So what I wanted to do last week is I had to give you the full antidote. And that's understanding that our lives are really defined again by our core self. And that really, to me, is defined by the value put upon me by our Creator. So, with that being said, thank you for listening to me. I hope you enjoyed this. Please give me your comments. If you need to reach me via email, it's ftlcounselingco@gmail.com. Or we're going to be putting this on my Facebook, and we'll be giving you that information as well. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week.